to all the people that are jumping in right now. The number keeps jumping up. Each week we've had growth in our audience and people interested in this subject. This is a three-part series conversation that we're calling The City in Which We Live. And the focus of this conversation is to bring some of the leading minds around Atlanta in architecture, design, construction, development, real estate, and look at what the implications and the impact of the pandemic are on what we build and how we build it. So thank you for joining us today. This is the third of a three-part series. The first week, 2 weeks ago, the first episode, we focused on the process of shutting down. Last week, part two, we focused on the challenges of reopening. And today, I think we're gonna have our most fun conversation of all, because we're focusing on what are the deeper implications and changes that are in store for us in the midterm and particularly the long term. What's really changing out there. So I want to thank everyone for participating. We've got a Q&A. You've got the Q&A function there, and we'd love to have any questions that you might have for the panel. Please hit us with that. We also have the chat function going, and just in case we don't have enough multitasking going on, Jesse Allman from tvsdesign will be hitting you with some polls, so keep an eye out for that. I want to quickly reintroduce our panelists and ask them to just say hello. First is Janet Simpson, president of tvsdesign. Good morning, Janet.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Next is Gene Kansas, brightly lit from the side.
Yes. Good morning. Thanks for having me, TVS.
Yeah, you got that Constellations logo rocking in the back now, so we know where you're from.
Enjoy.
Great. Next is Dr. Dawn Haney of Georgia State, where she is both teaches and researches. She's also a practicing designer. Morning, Dr. Dawn.
Good morning.
Hey, and then we've got Lawrence Gellerstadt. Some of you know him from Cushman Wakefield. Some of you know him from his time at WeWork. Everybody knows him as the go-to guy in hooking up early stage technology companies with cool spaces. Morning, Lawrence.
Morning, y'all.
Great. Everybody looks good. So that's who we are. So today, before we launch into sort of the deeper, more profound things, which I think we've all been itching to talk about, I wanted to look out at the midterm, and I would characterize midterm as, say, 6 to 24 months. And that sounds, and 2 months ago, that would have been considered short term, but things are moving so fast right now. And the big question, I think, that's sort of hanging in everybody's mind is about inventory. Is there about to be a big glut of space? And if so, where geographically and in what sectors? So, Lawrence, I'm looking at you on the screen right now. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, it's going to be interesting. I think the big question, at least right now around office especially, is how much of this temporary workforce comes back, how much of this is furloughed. But I mean, I think I looked at a graph, in the New York Times article that I think you guys sent around, but it was about the unemployment stuff that's just come out. And I thought that the line on the right side of the graph was a border. But it wasn't. It's just so many jobs lost that it looks like a border, and it stands out from everything else. It's 20 million people. I think as optimistic as I like to be, and there's a lot to be optimistic about, I think there's no way that there's not a glut of space. And I don't think it's really geographic or submarket dependent. I think there's just going to be losses everywhere. And so I think we'll just have to see how that goes. But to me, I haven't seen much to suggest that there won't be a lot of space. I think it's just going to be about what happens from that. Where do people go? What spaces come back? And it'll only be partial. There's going to be paint everywhere.
Hey, I forgot to introduce David Nelson. David, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Sorry, you weren't on my screen, so I forgot you. But David
All
Nelson
right.
from Carter. What are you seeing, David?
You know, I don't think it's too dissimilar from what Lawrence was saying. You know, when you talk about the next, I don't know, 6 to 20, whatever months, it's hard to do a lot in a very quick, short period of time, given people's leases and other things. But, you know, certainly right now, it's just a matter of how much cash do companies have and can they hang on and get through. And there's definitely articles and, you know, thinking on both sides of it, but you know, from a small restaurant to a business, it's hard, and I think you will be seeing space coming available, and there's opportunities there.
Or do you already have clients that are cutting their space?
You know, we don't have anyone cutting their space yet. However, we have now toured 3 different buildings across a couple different sectors, office and hospitality, not yet on the restaurant side of buildings that could come available just because, and these were buildings that were already failing pre-COVID, but now with this, it's almost like it's the final blow. And so I think we're early on some of those, but we are seeing that in the market.
And are those bargain spaces right now?
Not all bargain spaces. I mean, we just came out of a situation where, I mean, real estate was kind of on a high. And so getting owners to reset their view on exactly what they have is hard. And so that's why I think some of this stuff just takes time. When you talk about the medium term, sometimes an owner has to live with this for a little while and realize how bad it really is or what the income really is going to be. But with the couple properties that we were touring, they were already suffering kind of pre. And so with this happening and then them looking into the future, we are seeing some bargains on those.
Yeah, so you say sometimes it takes a while for that mental readjustment to happen. How long is a little while?
I think if you don't get income for a year, that's, you know, if your income's hit 50%, say, for a long period of time, I mean, it's once you're starting to miss debt payments, and a lot of times the lender pushes you into that conversation. And so, but it takes time, certainly.
Yeah. Gene, what are you seeing?
You know, this time, I think it's just exposing a lot of things we already knew in many ways. These things that are either like hiding in plain sight, or we knew them, but we were distracted by all the work we were doing, or just didn't want to, you know, accept it, let's say. And you know, our firm,
For example, what, Gene?
Well, for example, churches. You know, we've been talking a lot about office space because, you know, at least the 3 of us, you know, David and LG and myself, you know, in commercial real estate, you think about office a lot. Churches, for at least the last like 5 to 10 years, have seen fewer, you know, worshipers coming in. And you see a lot of churches that have been almost forced to sell. We've been talking about this utilization or optimization of workspace. What about place for, you know, prayer? And that's just, I think, one where you're going to see more and more disposition in that world. On the way over to the office this morning, I was passing by a mega bus. I mean, I cannot imagine there are many people jumping to a mega bus right now. So it's really any space that has a human being going into it, which is basically every space on the planet that we have to be looking at. And I think a lot of them, it had already been pretty obvious that we're over-consuming, we've overbuilt, and now it's still the same amount of space. It's just how is it going to be optimized or used? It'll be fewer people. I think that's really what we're talking about here.
Janet, what are you saying?
Well, it's a little bit of combination of all these things that have been mentioned, but I think that there are several key dynamics happening right now, and in the flow of watching the flow of money, and just consumer confidence, and when you look at those jobless rates, you know that even if a vaccine came out tomorrow and we all came out again, there's still a lot of businesses that aren't going to come back. There's still going to be a slow, coming back of that flow into the market. I think that the other thing is adoption of technology. It's happening. The ingenuity that everybody's having to get into to keep their businesses going is having you understand really what technology platforms provide for you and how that's really different. And it's also changing your preferences in some areas. It's easier to shop online. It's easier to get your groceries delivered. It's easier to work from home. So I think that there's a little bit of that that's just going to change your behavior. And then there is what's the actual demand, and that change of behavior and that change of consumer confidence. How does that change what there's a demand for? And so in the interim, yes, some things are going to go vacant for a little while you're trying to figure out what's the new use for it, or what's the new demand. So there's a shift for sure, a major shift, happening.
So what's your short-term or midterm strategy for that?
Well, we are really focused on being able to help where we can help the best is to figure out the solutions for, as Jean was saying, the problem is that it's not the space itself, it's bringing people into the space and helping them be comfortable there. What are the changes you have to make? And I do believe that I have a lot of confidence in people that are in health and in science to really be able to figure out how to deal with treating and preventing, the disease. But where we really come into play is how do you facilitate an environment that has a baseline, provision for staying healthy. And that's where we have to figure it out. We can't just say wear a mask and go back. We really need to figure it out.
David, you were talking about people needing to readjust their mindsets, and that can take a little time. What's your strategy for dealing in that environment?
Yeah, so our strategy coming out of all this, or thinking about this, are kind of just three different things of where we think everything's headed. One would be just reliability. So where are reliable cash flows, and how do we target those or go after those? Second would be affordability. We just think, if you think about people looking to manage cash, and anytime you come out of a situation like this, everyone starts to think about, well, was I spending too much on that? Do I really need this? And so I think affordability would be key. And then the last would be around convenience, just of, what works for organizations, what works for the business, what was working, what wasn't working, and how do we make it more convenient. And so those would be the three things that we are really thinking hard about, and will flow through kind of to specific space decisions as we go, and as we talk about this today.
Yeah. What about it, Gene? What's your strategy?
To understand what people want and give it to them, which is changing very rapidly. I do believe that flexibility and pliability of space is going to be really important. Like multiple types of uses for the same type of building, but being able to, add on. Let's say I went out yesterday for a cup of coffee to Chrome Yellow on Edgewood, and there's no one parking there. Turn the entire parking lot into, a place where you can have enough distance for now. This actually might be a great thing for like our parking lot problem in Atlanta, and a traffic problem for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Lawrence, what's your strategy? You got a 2.5-month-old company there?
Yeah, so I mean, our strategy as a company is really focused around. It's the same thing we do on the advice side for our landlord clients. Is really just what Gene said. Is trying to figure out, a little bit about what the right stuff to do is, but more about how to address people's fear. Because that's really what it comes down to, is we can't provide a super clean environment. We're not going to provide sort of a zero risk environment. That's not possible. So it's really about what are the things you can do, block and tackle, how much are you going to invest in that, and then what can people get comfortable with. In our group, we're very lucky, and I think you'll see a trend towards this a little bit, we work in a single story office with an exterior door. We have our own HVAC system. We pop the door open and you can go to your office and not touch anything. And we've got room to do that. And we're sort of doing shifts into the office to start. And again, I don't know how much we're lowering the risk by doing that, but we're certainly making people more comfortable to come back to start. And so I think that's really the trend, is going to be looking at all what have hospitals done to keep their buildings as clean as possible. That's going to start to become applicable in office for sure. And that investment's going to be worthwhile, maybe not to the full extent, but that kind of stuff is the trend, is really how do you create a healthy environment and communicate that there's reduced risk, and how do people start accepting that there is no zero risk?
Yeah, I agree. We're talking a lot again about office. Atlanta has, I think, something like 71 million square feet of office. We have over 550 million square feet of warehouse and industrial space. And those folks can't work from home. So what Janet's talking about and Lawrence is talking about, I agree. It's really, going to be applied to that sector in the highest degree of majority.
What's going on with that warehouse business? Are they rocking along, or are they hurt?
I mean, it depends on what they're storing. There's a lot of, this had also been occurring in advance of coronavirus, and ULI, Urban Land Institute, had come out with their 2020 trends report. Industrial and last mile logistics were going to be important anyway. If you need to get something like pretty quickly, your warehouse is busy. If you're an assembly plant and you're doing something that's like mission critical at this time, you're going to be pretty busy, and you still need the same amount of people putting together their different component parts. There are other warehouse and industrial use, I'm sure, that are suffering.
Yeah. So you hit on something that I think is a good segue into looking at the longer term. There's a lot of commentary out, and you see a lot of projections out there, and it's always scary to make projections, because if you go back and look at 9/11 or 2008, people can make some pretty drastic predictions. Some may come true to some extent. Others look pretty foolish in retrospect. So it's really hard to predict. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get into predicting things that people will hold us accountable for 5 years from now as being ridiculous. But the theme that I've noticed in looking at a lot of the projections of how this is going to affect society, business, et cetera, is that the main impact of this is it's going to accelerate trends that were already reshaping things. And it's everything from the slowdown of globalization and move to nationalization, the rise of China, the move to online retail, the death of retail, the shift to remote work, and just a general move to technology changing the way that we function. Given all that, as you look out, last week we talked about how are you managing things? Where's the tape on the floor and the plexiglass that you put up? If you look out a little, if you look out further in terms of what are the deeper changes, and I want to break it down into three things. What are the deeper changes with existing buildings? It's that we don't have a whiteboard that we can just sort of erase everything and start over again. What are the changes with new projects, new construction, new designs? And then finally, what's the comprehensive effect that has on our landscape, particularly our urban areas? So who wants to talk about what are going to be the permanent changes, or what you believe the permanent changes will be in the structures that we already have? Dawn, you want to talk about that?
Sure, I can kick us off. So I think that as we talked in earlier episodes, existing trends, so we had really seen an emphasis on human-centered design. We'd seen an emphasis on wellness. And I think those are certainly going to be at the top of people's minds as they begin to move forward, whether or not they're renovating a building or creating a new project.
When you say human-centered design, what does that mean?
I think it's going to be a lot of focus on the occupants. What are their needs? What do they need the space for? How can we best support their activities? How do we identify what activities they want in that space? And how do we create flexibility for them? But it's also about their health and well-being. So is there a way to increase the amount of natural light? Can we filter the air to give them better air quality? Can we sort of give them more choice and types of spaces to be more interactive, or ways that they might relate to their colleagues in a way that's safe and moving forward, right? The other thing I think you'll see as a trend is that we've been sort of witnessing is this real emphasis on experiential design and placemaking. So people really have a tremendous amount of choice in what they can do, and we have now with the digital age, a lot of digital choice as well. And so I think the spaces and places that people are designing or wanting to visit need to have and really offer a really enriched experience. And whether that's the office, so the reason why you come to the office for interaction and sort of social engagement, or whether or not you go to the restaurant, and what's the offering there. Just some of the things that I think that people are going to really begin to focus on.
Yeah, I read that the question is shifting from what is my reason to work from home to what is my reason to go to the office?
Right, and I think that many companies are doing that. They're evaluating what they need at the office, and then many are thinking about whether or not they need to expand their offices to increase their headcount, like we would traditionally if you're going to have growth. Now they're wondering if they can actually just offset that with an increased percentage of unassigned space.
So same space divided by fewer people?
Divided by more people. So you have, so you have a greater unassigned percentage, which allows you to have a larger number of personnel with the same amount of space.
So it's a lot about how the interior is organized?
Yes.
Yeah. Janet, your background's in interiors. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I do have a background in workplace interiors, and I lead an architecture and interiors firm. So I have both the concerns from a leader and just the health and well-being of our people and what's the space costing us, combined with this understanding that where we can really help is to truly figure this thing out in a holistic way. And so I think that one of the things that is going to really stick around that impacts our space is that we really understood that the whole solution is fully integral to what is the digital platform you're using and what does that not provide you that you need physical space for. And it's a little bit of a flip, because we used to look at the physical space first and look at the number of people we needed to fit in there and what they needed to do. And then on top of that, you have these digital platform tools. But I would say first, our big investment is in the digital workplace platform. And I've seen some other things this week that we're going to do to enhance that and invest in that. And that's a much better investment than honestly, than taking out more real estate is for us. And so, but I still think at the end of the day, when you do bring people together, it might not be to do the work in the traditional way that we've been doing, but we have been looking at what is a happy, healthy, helpful environment. What do we need to do that? Because what people enjoy and what actually satisfies a real need you have, that's essential, and that sticks around, and you find a way to do that. Some of the other things that we were doing, sitting in traffic, having to be in the office, putting up with a whole lot of mess around us that somebody else made that we shouldn't want to be in anyway. Those are the things that you're more than happy to let fall to the wayside, because they really weren't essential to your productivity and your health before anyway. So I do think it's a fundamental shift to looking completely at what we need differently.
Yeah, I think everyone saw the New York Times had a page one story on that basically asked the question, is the open floor plan dead?
And to me, I think it's the wrong question. To me, it's what are you doing when you come to the office? Why? Because the open floor plan was still assuming people were coming into the office working on a daily basis, right? It was just they were doing it in an open space. So I don't even think it's about open space versus like enclosed space. I think it's about how you are providing, what's the experience that you actually need to do, because the digital workplace platforms are so powerful and we're all adopting them at a different rate, but it does change why you would need an office space for any company, because I can't make the case even for our firm right now. Obviously, we don't truly need the office space, right? We've been functioning for 8 weeks completely without it. And I had a meeting this week where everyone confirmed that we're doing great work, we're doing creative work, we're doing quality work. We do miss each other though. We do miss face-to-face interaction, but we actually are accomplishing the work.
Anybody?
I'll jump in, and just as we think about, you were talking about accelerating trends, and Dawn talked about experience, and Janet talked about experience. I mean, I think even the last, could have been 5 or 10 years, we've been talking about this. We're entering into the experience economy. People are spending more money going to restaurants, and you're seeing office making changes with the open floor plan or WeWork or others. How do we improve the experience? And so when you ask the question, like, is retail dead? And because everyone can buy it online, it's like, well, it's not dead. It's just a matter of everyone has to take a very hard look at, like, what is the experience? I was talking to my wife 2 nights ago, and she was like, her and the girls are going to go out like in 2 days or something and go to Target just to like walk around there. I'll be in masks and everything else, but they're going to go to Target to shop. And it was like, well, they can get it all online, and they've done this to the grocery store too. But I was like, well, why are you going to do, and like, why would you even do that? And she's like, I just want to go somewhere and do that. And I'm like, well, why Target? Would you do the same thing for a department store? And she's like, you like Macy's? I'm like, yeah. I mean, she's like, no, of course not, because it's a horrible experience. She's like, but Target's a great experience. Well, why is Target a good experience? Yeah. Because everything's cheap there. There's like, you can get everything. It's really nice. It just feels good. I don't know. It's a good experience. And so retail's not dead. It's just going to be different in how, I mean, certainly online is totally changing everything. And so now how do stores interact with people, and how do restaurants, that's going to change. Everyone's going to have to think about how to do that. But that was a trend that was already happening. I mean, the same on office space. This trend was happening towards experience. It's like the office started years and years and years ago because people couldn't communicate the way they can now and couldn't work the way they can now. And so it's like, you don't need to go into an office to be productive and do your work. You can do that in solitude, or you can do that on a Zoom call, but people do want to be together. And people do, and creativity does get enhanced, 1 by solitude, but 2 by collaboration. So how is the office going to look? It may be all open space because it's just a place for congregation, for your office to come back together and share ideas and move things forward in a less amount of time than you would have done in the past. The same with the mall. Everyone's like, oh, the mall's dead. Well, the mall's is typically located in a very central place where everyone does want to congregate, but they might just not want to do it the way it has been done recently. And so I just think those are the ways you're going to see things change, but there is a need for people wanting to be together. I mean, Janet said, we do want to see each other. We want to be around each other, but we might not want to have to do it 5 days a week and sit through 3 hours of traffic to do it. We might want to do it 1 day a week or 3 days a week or whatever that might be.
Gene, you built your business based on the whole idea of communal and community. I know you've got some thoughts on this.
Well, I was loving listening to what David said and just kind of was dreaming. When I was in grad school and studying design, it was in a digital medium design. Nonetheless, there's a technique called design fiction, so kind of like science fiction. And you would come up with like the most wild thing that you could imagine, and then you kind of work back. And when David was talking about Target, I was thinking about Disney and the problems they're having. Like, I can't wait to see like the Disney themed grocery store where you get on a ride and you go through and you're getting like your cereal or whatever. I think like thinking about things like that, and that Disney, by the way, call me if you want, but like thinking like things like that are the way to get to what David and we all are talking about. Like think way far out there and then dial it back. One thing that I hope doesn't come back, and it's kind of funny because Lawrence and myself were on a ULI panel talking about trends and fads. And and it was like a interactive thing, or is this a trend? Is this a fad? And we talked about bird scooters and everyone was like, trend. I haven't seen a scooter in 8 weeks and I am thrilled about it. I feel bad for those companies. I'll be curious to see if those come back, but we talked about it because those have a lot to do with how you kind of interact with a workspace, how you get to it, how you go to pick up a coffee, how you get from your apartment to public transportation, what have you. So that's kind of where my mind has been with all this.
I was going to say,
Yeah, I mean, I think one interesting thing. So we're just reopened our office, and it's they sent out the list of rules, and you go through all the list of rules, and it's like, okay, I can't go to the break room. I can't even use the hand wash in the break room. We're just going to lock that off. That's the only sink we have in the whole place. You have to go to the public bathroom, and if you're there, you can't go stand next to somebody's desk because you're too close to 6 feet. And if you're going to talk to somebody in the office, just do a Zoom call real quick. And we can't use the conference room, so do like a conference on. And it's like, why the heck are we going in the office? And so the whole thing is thinking about what is that experience and why do you even have it, and what's the reason for doing it.
so I think that there is a distinction between what you're describing, David, which is sort of the immediate protocols that we need to do to sort of ease back into routines, and then some of the things that Jean's talking about and sort of visioning on what the lasting impacts will be. And if you think about the retail that we were talking about, you had the department store, which offered an experience that people were really interested in. And as things shifted, it was novel, it was new, from the small stores on the open, dirty street. And so it was nice to be inside where it was air conditioned, and you could have lunch in the cafe or whatever it was. And then you see this shift back, right? So we're leaving the department store and we want a more unique, multi-dimensional experience. So we're going back to designing, the new urbanists do this, right? We're going back to designing the street and the small individual boutiques. And I go from one store to the next store. And you've had this experience for a long time right on Rodeo, where part of it is, to carry multiple bags, right? So that you have this sort of a multi-dimensional experience. And you see it with the redevelopment of the stadiums. You see it with emerging smaller centers like Avalon here in Atlanta, where people are really interested in this mixed use, multi-dimensional experience. And I think it's just going to permeate everywhere we are.
Mm-hmm.
While we're talking about existing spaces, we got a question in from Elaine DeLeo. Or I think I'm saying that right. Oh, she just deleted her question. But I think the question was, I think
I tried to answer it in writing. So I'm sorry if I moved it over. If you click the answer, you can read it.
Got it. What'd you say? Well, let me pitch the question is, and I guess how much are companies worried about the liability of opening back up at this point?
Yeah, I don't want to restate the words if it's unnecessary for the group, but I mean, this is certainly something that has come up a lot this week as people have gone back, and it's a question that I think is really, really important from a business owner and a building owner perspective. Is we're clearly in a litigious society. We're at a point where people are going to have trouble finding jobs, and so I certainly expect, especially without any precedent here, there's no clear local or federal standards as to how to address something like this. And so with no clear standard, you're definitely going to see cases come up, and you're certainly going to see that litigated in court. And I think until our federal and local governments figure out the standards and provide that down to business owners and building owners, you're sort of in uncharted territory. So I certainly expect to see this, pop up. And so I think we all have to be careful. This gets back to a lot of what I think is going to be this mid to long-term impact is It's a lot less about this virus, which I think we can be thankful for. It's certainly killing a lot of people. It's very dangerous. But overall, it's certainly, there are diseases that could be a lot worse. And I think this is going to be a lot about the fear. It's a lot about what's the standard and what's the fear, and what, are you going to get accused of.
Yeah, David, what are your tenants thinking about in terms of liability?
Well, it's kind of across the board. I mean, we've even had down to the restaurateur who's nervous about, we had one restaurateur who could operate mostly in a pickup environment, and this was a week ago, was nervous about, well, if I have a line of people and somebody gets sick, maybe not as liability, but I'm out here to serve the community with what I do, and now I put people at risk, and or I put my employees at risk. And so there is, and I don't think I've seen an email yet or a plan for reopening yet that didn't include, and if you feel uncomfortable, don't come. And I'm assuming that is a risk management strategy of covering yourself. It's, if you don't feel comfortable, because nobody really, like Lawrence said, there is no state mandated, CDC mandated, there's no mandate that says this is exactly what you should do. And if you do this, you assume no liability. These are your buildings. This is your office space. You've asked people to come back. And if you're an owner or you're a senior leader and you've asked people to come back and do work, do you accept some risk for doing that? Which is why I think that catch-all, if you don't feel comfortable, don't come, still is on everything I've seen.
And going back to the first episode of this series, and in this necessary culture of preparedness. I mean, I don't know if anyone else saw this. It was unbelievable. The 5-year-old that stole the parents' car and was driving it to California from Utah to buy a Lamborghini 2 days ago. Insane. You can't predict the things that are going to happen out there. He didn't get the Lamborghini, by the way. But you just have to do your best to be prepared. And that, also involves speaking to your lawyers and trying to tease out as many problems as you possibly can before they occur.
Yeah. I want to move now we've been talking about existing spaces, but I want to talk now about future projects, future spaces, both what's in the pipeline and what's even beyond that. I was struck about a week ago, Les Staley, the CEO of Barclays, the global bank that's based in the UK. There's a beautiful building in London. And he said, we're having to reevaluate whether the idea of having 7,000 people in a building is relevant anymore. What do you all see as the big things, the big shifts that are going to be happening in terms of what projects get approved, how are they different, and how long is that going to take?
Yeah, I know we had talked about, I think, in our preparation for this, which I think is right, because we have 20 minutes left and it's our third one. And I think, taking some hard edges in this conversation is probably more interesting than us, bantering about stuff that's right in the middle of the road. So I'm happy to take a hard edge here and just say that, and I experienced this personally. I refuse to accept a future where this kind of permanent 6-foot concept or permanent people working from home exists. Doesn't work for me. I'm going to be back at a baseball stadium at some point. I don't know when. I'm going to be back, in an office collaborating with people again. Now, we may not shake hands. We may sit, a seat apart. There may be more hand washing here and there. But I just don't think, I don't think this is a permanent reality of separating ourselves and creating a permanent distance. I think hygiene certainly should increase. And I think you'll see people listen to folks like Dawn and other researchers that we've been ignoring for a while. I was reading about biophilic design and increased air quality and how important outside air and light is. And that's stuff that, quite frankly, real estate folks like me have rolled their eyes at forever. And I think we're going to start to listen to that stuff. I think the experiential stuff remains important. But I've talked to a bunch of people about what's next in co-working, and I quite frankly think it's every vertical, apartments, hospitals, everything, every real estate thing is there are glacial drifts, right? Momentum that is headed in a certain way that is not going to be, the COVID crisis is not going to stop those glacial shifts. And part of that, is that people want this experience. People want to be around each other. We cannot go pure digital. I mean, we certainly have the capability with iPads and phones and FaceTime to all go pure digital for everything if we wanted to. But that's not what we want as human beings. And while there are risks associated, and we have to take those risks into account, I'll just take a broad view that I'll be in the category of less overall change from a physical structure on a long-term basis, because I just don't think as human beings, at least for this specific virus, we're willing to accept permanent implications of no more sitting in a stadium.
Paul, I'll concur with what Lawrence is saying, and particularly because I've been looking at trying to think about lasting impacts on those who have gone through this before. And so if you look at Asia, they're still building dense cities. They're still building dense office spaces. They're still building incredible, very rich public spaces and restaurants and retail spaces because they want to be in community. And they have adopted a sort of seemingly cultural norm about being respectful for one another, and that self-quarantining when sick is sort of their new normal, that it's okay, it's acceptable, and it's respected. And they sort of worked through this, and they've also had a tremendous amount of planning in place that they learned from their previous pandemic that they went through. And of course, we're seeing more resilient and have withstood this a bit better. And I don't know if our culture in the West is as willing to do the planning and the multi-dimensional planning across all the different kinds of disciplines that we need to think through and all the different levels of government that we need to think through and really be comprehensive. But I hope that we learn from this, and that's what comes out of this, is that we're more collaborative and more thoughtful as we think about the new projects coming forward. I don't think the new projects are going to shift tremendously from those who've been progressive thus far. I think those who have been fairly traditional, like Barclays, are now realizing the shift that many people have been doing for the last 10 years, and they may see a much more drastic change. But I think we need to spend a lot of meticulous, detailed, really tremendous effort and time to plan for more resiliency and think about more agility in our spaces.
So are we going to see any more skyscrapers with 7,000 people in them?
Yes, but I don't think it may be one company. I think it may be multiple companies sort of working simultaneously on an as-needed basis for the space that they need. We've been moving towards a more task-based design strategies, more so than personnel, for a long time, in many, not everywhere, but in many companies, and I think that's going to continue.
Yeah, Lawrence, you focus on early stage tech companies that tend to be pretty small. What's your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing. It's those companies, and I think a lot of us on this call actually probably more of us work for smaller companies, and would say the same thing, which is, a key component of working for the small company, and quite frankly, work in general, right, is that the work that you do every day is not really the sole satisfying part of what you're doing. It's the team that you're building and the vision that you have and the shared experience. And so I think for tech companies especially, you've seen them invest over and over and over again in culture, whether that's, as soon as they raise their first round of funding, they've all got matching socks. They've got pullovers and hats, right? It's the cliche from Silicon Valley. And that stuff is funny, but it's also very serious. It's one of the most important parts is creating that shared vision, asking people to work harder for less, and asking people to believe in having equity in the future and all those things. So certainly to me, a shared experience, which an office is a part of that, and quite frankly, a mixed use environment more likely, I think that'll continue to be really, really important.
So if the 7,000 skyscraper is not going away, what's really going to thrive? What kind of spaces are really going to thrive?
Yeah, I think that design for a long time, it's not that commercial spaces were completely void of anything to do with your health and safety and well-being. But there are things that were already trends that are going to continue to, you're going to push them because of the way that we are aware of the health needs now. But touchless entry environments and things that were just annoying anyway. Nobody liked, going through a really crowded space and getting exposed to lots of germs just because you had to unnecessarily touch a lot of things and get in an elevator. There are things like that we can solve for. That, like I said, just the things that were nuisances anyway. But what was never a nuisance is getting together and seeing people and having these rich experiences and being able to go out and freely explore the world, but not have this fear element top of mind every time you encounter people. But I do think that we've really got to look closely at where how the air circulation is happening within buildings and the fresh air and the filtration. I think that's going to get a serious overhaul of minimum standards. I think that any technology that allows you to move seamlessly through a space with less touch points is really good. But I think that I believe, and I agree with what Lawrence was saying, just the human spirit and what we want to do. Everything in us is going to fight against a permanent situation where we have to stay 6 feet apart from each other. We don't want to wear a mask out in public. We don't want to walk out and feel like top of mind every day. And I've said before, it's like, you don't want to treat people like they're a hazard to your health. You want to treat people in a welcoming, and a space should do that. It should be welcoming. It shouldn't be just full of don't do this and don't do that. And it's all about creating these experiences. And I don't think that that's going to change necessarily the fact that we need to work and we need to shop and we need to eat and those things, but the mixed environment and how they come together is really where we've got an opportunity, but not necessarily a major, dumping of and abandoning everything we've known.
Jean, that sounds like that would favor something that you talked about earlier, which is transitioning spaces from one use to another.
Well, I mean, all of this is just people on the planet, I mean, and there's like what we want, and then there's what's in our DNA, like what I think we're talking about, this need for happiness, wherever it is. And we're willing to make sacrifices for that. In the very first episode, we all introduced ourselves, kind of where we are from. And I think like most of us said what we like to eat. From New Orleans, like fried shrimp. People in New Orleans are not going to stop eating fried shrimp. And we all know it's bad for you. I just think that we're going to continue to do the things that we want to do. And the professionals, like TVS, so with Janet and Dawn, and who are looking out for those interests, like clean air and circulation and touchless, are going to be a huge part of how we can continue to be happy, which is a big part of being healthy. We haven't touched too much on emotional well-being here, but that's inside space, outside space. It's just on the planet. So I think that's the part to focus on, really.
So we're starting to talk about this a little bit already. Is what are the implications of all of this in terms of the overall landscape? And I'm thinking particularly of urban areas. I think we all saw Derek Thompson, who's an economist, had a long piece prognosticating on the impact of the pandemic, particularly on retail and restaurants. And it was very provocative, and it was fairly gloomy. And I think it was entitled the flattening of the American city. And the idea is that the only businesses that are going to survive are going to be big, large, well-capitalized chains. All the mom and pop businesses are going to be swept out with the flood, and entrepreneurs are going to have to go to the suburbs. Dawn, I know you've got a point of view about all of those subjects. What are you thinking?
I disagree. And I was, when I read the article, the first point that was discussed was that there had already been a trend towards an exodus from cities. And if that were the case, we wouldn't be having a sort of a national discussion about gentrification. I think people are yeah, right. So I think people, you have the High Line, you have the Belt Line, you have paths everywhere. So I think people are, his point was that there was an exodus out of the cities. And I think, I mean, I agree in that it was priced out. Like, people have been priced out because the demand is so high, and it's raised prices so much that people are looking for places that are affordable, which is another task force that we've created here in Atlanta. And what people are doing is moving to the closest, most affordable neighborhood that they can to the city, which is why we've seen in the Atlanta area such a flux in Southside to David's property right there at Summer Hill, right? So there's really been sort of a look on focus. We see redevelopments in brownfields at Fort McPherson, at the Dorville plant. People are really trying to get as close as they can to the city, but within their price range. I don't think that's going to change. And so I don't think you can say that there has been an exodus from the city. And all the polling of millennials suggests that they want to live downtown, or they want to live in urban areas. And I don't know how much this is really going to shift. To Jean's point, what we know and what we do are sometimes, or what we feel, are not always in proximity. We may be fearful of living with our neighbors, but we want to be with them, and we will figure out how to do that in a way that's
yeah. And you've made the point before that people want to live in the city. It's how many trade-offs are they willing to make in terms of, you know, the risk of crime and all the other factors that go into urban living.
Right. So we see people going into areas where there's a high crime rate because they're choosing to live close to the cities, even though there is a risk. And I think that that's not going to change because the risk is different. Instead of crime, it's disease. So I think people still want to be in community. I think they want to be in close proximity, and they still want to have that communal experience. And I don't think that's going to change. It may change and be different for each major city, like New York versus Atlanta, but in general, I don't think it's going to change.
I agree with what everyone's saying. I'm very curious to see what happens with people's desire to travel, either for work or for fun, because at some point we do draw the line, like, and that one is still, I think, a very fear-based moment for everyone.
Yeah, I'll make one prediction for sure on the retail side, and David and I have talked about this. I could talk about it a lot, but I think it's something that existed before and now has been exposed. Is retail leases, quite frankly, from a real estate perspective, weren't worth very much before the COVID crisis, but the retail is insanely valuable to the fabric and the culture of a neighborhood and of a project and of a city. And so there was a guy on my LinkedIn today joking about negative yields and saying that he's going to get paid to lease office space when everything comes back. And I said, no, it's not going to happen. But I actually do believe that for retail, you will see building owners paying retailers to come back. It'll be in the form of a management agreement, similar to co-working, where it's an amenity that adds value to the whole building. And so I'll make the prediction that you've got a lot of restaurateurs out there who are really, really good, who've lost ownership of their building or lost their lease, and they're still there, and people want those services. And you're going to see the building owners and the city come together, and they're going to pay for that service. It may be formatted differently, and it probably should be, but I'll predict we're paying retailers to operate to maintain the fabric of the city. It's too important, and it really does add value everywhere else.
Yeah, that article we talked about talked about 4 floors of residential sitting on top of a single floor of empty retail space. Is not a good model.
Yeah, I mean, well, you saw that even during the condo craze here in town, where we had condos built on top of retail and the retail sat vacant. I mean, it's just, it is going to happen. There will be retailers that suffer and restaurants that go away because there's no, it's cost them so much, a restaurateur to open. Now they've closed and they have to reopen. And all of these businesses were so, month to month and strapped for cash that I do agree with Lawrence in that and Don saying it's not going to go away, because if office goes to where there's more people working at home and others, there's more monotony there, then there's even more of a desire of wanting to go somewhere special. And these restaurateurs have created really special places that aren't just about eating. It's about going and experiencing and communing and spending money almost on like entertainment more than it is on food. And so there's a desire for it. The problem is they really haven't, if you're month to month, you're not making, it's not working. And so I do think you can see a scenario where you do have 4 floors of residential, but it's on top of retail, and the retail's fully subsidized by what's above in some way, shape, or form.
I agree with Lawrence too. I would say though that I think it's new and will be something here that we're seeing in a more conspicuous way with the smaller retail. This has been going on for a long, long time though. Big example in Atlanta, the Braves got paid to move big time. That's as much of a cultural amenity and the sport and festival of it all, which is wonderful. And then what did that support? So that's a very big example. I do agree that we'll see a lot of smaller ones too.
Yeah. So we've only got a few minutes, and I wanted to end with some optimism, which I've already heard a lot of optimism today, which is encouraging. What are you hearing? Lawrence, you've already hit at this. What are you hearing out there that you think the predictions that you just think are wrong? Or what are the opportunities that are out there that people aren't talking about?
Yeah, so the prediction that I think is wrong is that co-working and open office is over, that all that stuff is going away forever, and that people can work from home, and they're going to work from home now, in masses. I don't think that that's true. I certainly think work from home, and Dawn and I talked about this last time, the productivity question is always big in my mind. Certainly the cost savings, density was a cost savings for companies, and so working from home is a new opportunity for that. So I'm not saying that it won't be a trend, that we won't see that increase. Because it benefits corporate bottom line, you will see a push for more of that for sure. But I think if you gave people the chance to choose, I just don't believe in that trend. And then the opportunity for me is something I've already talked about. I think there is a ton of opportunity to take the good work that Dawn and others have done on what really is healthy for an environment. And now it's worth it to finally invest in that. We've got a barrier that makes it worth it to invest in that. And so testing new technology and testing new, philosophy in that regard, all that stuff is going to be worthwhile. And I think so you're going to see really smart people get credit, and really cool things come from that. So I'm very interested in investing in that future.
Dawn, you look at these things on the long-term timeline. What do you think? What does history say?
I think that design has for many years, decades really, been really interested in human-centered design, and we've been interested in human health, safety, and wellness. I think we haven't done a really good job of communicating what it is that we do that's fundamental to keeping people healthy. And I think that this is a real opportunity for us to communicate what it is that we do on a daily basis. So for example, we've put soft seating areas and collaborative shared spaces in healthcare environments. And they are mimicking now more residential areas so that it's softer and less institutional. And we've designed fabrics and materials and things like that to withstand infectious disease and transmission. And that's mitigated, that's migrated over into some environments. Education is one of them. We do that at the university when we have such a large shared population. But I think you're seeing it in some offices. I think we need to expand that and really talk about it, and really talk about what we're doing to really sort of help keep people healthy. And it's not just from this crisis. We lose, 50,000 people on average from influenza every year, right? So there are a lot of things that we've been doing in design to try to keep people healthy. I think we need to do a better job of communicating what that is to sort of mitigate people's fears and then really continue to push ourselves to do more.
Yeah, we're towards the end of our time. Anybody else have a quick opportunity that they see?
I believe that we'll finally start to see mixed use developments working together. Like, I believe that there will be office, hotel, apartment, retail, where everything is serving each other. And I predict that we will see more private offices. And the extreme prediction is I believe we'll see someone doing a Zoom meeting on a Peloton from their private office, not in their home.
Great. Well, anybody else have one last thing to chime in before we close out?
I would just say that I think we need to keep our heads together through all this crisis and avoid going too far with extreme predictions of dramatic change based on just a one concern that we have now. Design solves for a multitude of things, not just one. And we want to thrive. We don't want to just survive.
Great. So I want to thank all of you, dear panelists, esteemed panelists. I want to thank everybody else for patching in with us, for the questions in the chat. Lawrence, you do a great job at answering these questions in the Q&A. Thank you for that, man. You're a better multitasker than I am. So once again, thanks everybody. It's been a very fun 3 episodes, and thank you for participating.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.